is a war. It's happening now. It will decide the fate of humanity. The time to choose sides has come. We are the resistance. We are the InfoWar.
Welcome to the InfoWars Nightly News. I'm David Knight, and it's Thursday, September 18th, 2014. Here are our top stories.
Tonight, what Britain really thinks about Scottish independence. Then, how secure are Apple products? And the campaign to declassify the censored 9/11 pages. That's next on the InfoWars Nightly News.
Now it's going to come out in the 28-page report that I've talked to congressmen who've seen it, Walter Jones and others, clearly says Saudi Arabia involved, stand down was ordered.
Today, September 18th, is the day that Scots go to the poll to decide if they're going to become independent of the United Kingdom. This is a major decision, not only for Scotland, but for the world, because it's a question of what you value. Do you value your independence? Do you value that over your security? Do you value self-determination and liberty over comfort? That is the question before the Scottish people, in my opinion. Take a look at this picture. This is how it's being posed to the people in Scotland. This Reuters picture that shows the Scottish yes vote says, Scotland's future in Scotland's hands. On the other side, you have vote no. It's just not worth the risk. Let me tell you something. This is always about liberty versus the promise of security. People who are slaves will never have any security. If you don't have control over your life, if you don't have control over your government, you do not have any security or any comfort. But that's what's being sold to them. Consider the fact that the Conservatives in England, the Tories, are putting this out as, say, Scotland is very socialist. True, it's not a perfect country. There is no perfect country. The UK has its problems. The United States certainly has its problems. Scotland has its own internal problems. They have minders assigned to children at birth, following them through decades. Now, the Tories, the Conservatives, are saying that Scotland is too socialist. That may very well be true. Yet, why would the English, why would the Conservatives want to have a country that they consider to be too socialist, too dependent on the government welfare check? Why would they want to keep them in union? I mean, if New York or California wanted to go their separate ways, I would welcome that. They could pursue their own socialist utopias apart from us. Why are the English concerned about that? Well, of course, that's not what they're concerned about. We'll see that in just a few minutes. Look at who is really getting heartburn over this. Of course, it's the bankers, it's the globalist corporations, it's the multinational oil companies. They're the ones who don't want to see this happen. Now, according to the Telegraph, the promises that have been made by the Tory government to Scotland in order to keep them in the Union is now a terrible mistake. They say the architect of a controversial funding formula for Scotland has described his own policy as a terrible mistake after David Cameron pledged to keep it despite a revolt from Tory MPs. However, Tory MPs have warned that the move could be voted down in the Commons, where Mr. Cameron faces a potential bloodbath at the hands of his own party. So let me break this down for you. Even if Scotland stays in, they may not get the promised concessions that the Conservatives have put out there to keep them in. This is the type of thing that's going to happen whenever you don't have control of your government. And of course, the whole point of liberty is always to have the smallest, closest government to the people as possible. That gives you the most control. It gives you the most independence and freedom. That's what our founders in America wanted. They tried to avoid consolidation as much as possible, dividing power between the central government in Washington and between the states and the people. That was the ultimate division. But then within the federal government itself, they divided it down by 3. Why? Because they felt that consolidation was the greatest possible threat to their liberty. And that's what we see from the New World Order. When you divide countries out like Scotland, and they are setting off a round of hope throughout the world that this may be possible. When you divide countries apart like this, when people get a government that is smaller, that is closer to them, they have a greater chance of controlling that government. That was the whole reason we had checks and balances in the American government. Look at what is happening here. They're being told that they're getting too many concessions in Scotland. The Conservatives are complaining that there's too much money already being given to Scotland versus other countries, England, Wales, etc. Take a look at this graph. This is what the Barnett formula would provide. This is what they're saying is a major mistake. And of course, you can see that Northern Ireland and Scotland are getting quite a bit more per capita than Wales and the UK. So why would the English want to do that? Why would they want to keep them in? We saw the same type of thing years ago in New Zealand. If you want to look at a country that is dependent on socialism, that follows socialism down the road, New Zealand had to take the red pill because they were on their own. They got to a point where they could no longer pay their embassy staff. It was that dire. They immediately turned around the ship of state, and they were able to do it because it was a small country. It didn't have the kind of inertia that the United States does. It didn't have the kind of inertia that the United Kingdom does. If you want to get people off of socialism, it's like kicking your 30-year-old son out of the basement and telling him to get a job. Eventually, they're going to hit the wall, and they'll be smaller and more able to turn that around if they're independent. But let's look at the real reason. The real reason that the bankers are freaking out about Scottish independence. This is from Washington Blog. He says it's really about oil. Specifically, if Scotland becomes independent, it will get to keep about 90% of the revenues from its huge oil reserves. And he quotes the New York Times, Al Jazeera, NBC, but Max Kaiser explained it, I think, the best. Here's the 3 points he makes. The UK can now borrow cheaply using this giant Scottish oil reserves as collateral. Number 2, if Scotland leaves, the collateral oil reserves will no longer be available. 3, so the cost of borrowing money for Britain will skyrocket. That's why this is really happening. This is why the bankers are freaking out. But of course, if Scotland has a vote and they declare independence, that is going to send shockwaves around the world, from Catalonia to Texas. Anyone who wants to have smaller local government will be encouraged by this. And they'll be encouraged, I think, even if Scotland decides to remain dependent on Great Britain, because at least they had the chance to have a vote.
Hi, I'm Dr. Group. Today, I'm proud and excited to announce a new product to the InfoWars Life product line. Introducing the first proprietary oxygen-based intestinal cleanser, OxyPowder, backed by real FDA-approved phase 1, 2, and 3 clinical trials. People are suffering from all kinds of digestive issues these days. All the toxins from the air, the food, the water, everything that you're exposed to on a daily basis ultimately ends up in the gut or affects the gut. My main focus was to come up with a remedy for this, something that's safe and effective that anyone can take on a regular basis to keep their intestinal lining clean. You have over 30 feet of intestinal lining that can be compacted, that can be toxic, that can be full of parasites, fungus, bacteria. What are you doing to keep that clean and flushed out? My recommendation is to clean your intestines at least 2 to 3 times a week to prevent the toxic buildup from going into your bloodstream. You owe it to yourself to take your health into your own hands and start cleansing your body today with OxyPowder. Secure your OxyPowder today at InfoWarsLife.com. That's InfoWarsLife.com.